Oh, and the woman of the hour, of course. I'm not sure why I forgot Miss Welsh, but so we're now recording. The time is now 5:02. Good evening, and welcome to the August 20th, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting. I'm Jonathan Briggs, Chair of the committee and District 2 Board Member. Miss Adlian, please call the roll.
Mr. Jonathan Briggs,
Present.
Dr. Zipporah Miller,
Present.
Ms. Lolita E. Walker,
Present.
Ms. Pamela Boozer Strother,
Present.
Mr. Brandon Jackson.
Okay. I think we're good. So with the quorum present, the Policy and Governance Committee meeting will come to order. And we are delighted to have you join us for tonight's meeting. Welcome back after a fast but short, or I guess I should say long but short break that we've had. This is our first meeting for the 2024-2025 school year. We're excited to begin reviews on new and old policies and pick up from where we left off. Before we dive into our discussions, let's meet our committee members. So we have some new faces and we have some returning faces. I will start with the introductions and then have the vice chair introduce herself. This will be followed by board members, the Board of Education staff, the administration staff, and finally our board legal counsel. Last but not least, of course. So I am Jonathan Briggs. I am the chair again for, I guess we'll now say this full year of the Policy and Governance Committee committee. Joining as the District 2 rep, that is for Riverdale, College Park, Berwyn Heights, Greenbelt, and New Carrollton. So excited to continue the work that we have been doing for the last year to move forward some of the priorities that we didn't get to accomplish last year. And I think really to represent and echo the voices and the sentiments of so many of our constituents and stakeholders that are very deeply engaged in this work. I will now pass it to our vice chair.
Good evening. Good evening. I am Dr. Zipporah Miller. I am the board member for District 5, which covers mostly Bowie and Upper Marlboro, and glad to serve this year on the Policy and Governance Committee as the vice chair. Looking forward to the work that we'll be doing together.
Great. I think we can go to other board members. Feel free to just jump in and then we'll kind of popcorn here.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Pamela Boozer Strother, District 3 Board of Education member, member of the committee. I'm happy to be back. I've served on this committee for many years during my time of service. I am now the longest serving board member. And also, I do want to say I'm very excited about this committee starting as we start our first year as a fully elected board. And I think that's probably one of the most important policy changes that has taken place since I've been in service. So I look forward to working with all of my colleagues and look forward to getting started tonight. Thanks.
Awesome. I am board member Lolita E. Walker. I am the chair of the board and represent District 9. I have 13 cities that I represent, so I will not say all of them, but it goes from Accokeek all the way to Baden and everywhere in between. So I'm excited to be here yet again for the Policy and Governance Committee, and I'm excited to continue to serve on this committee.
And I do want to note in absentia that we do have one other board member who is not present today, but we will definitely give him time to introduce himself to you all at our next meeting. So we'll now turn to the board staff. Administrative staff, board staff. So Mrs. Welsh, of course, you can go ahead there.
Good evening. I'm Robin Welsh, the Director of Government Relations, Compliance and Procedures.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Ravel D. Fitzpatrick. Pronouns are he and his, and I'm the director for the board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Adlin, Administrative Secretary to the board office.
I think finally our board counsel.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bradley Farrar, Service Counsel to the Board of Education. It's an honor to be here this evening.
Great. Thank you all for the introductions. We're very excited. Again, continuing the work that we started last year, but also I think so much more. And this is certainly a unique year. It's very rare that we have the politics that are happening at the national level that we are sure are going to trickle down to schools and school boards in particular. That's going to influence a lot of the policies that we'll have this year. So I think it'll definitely be an interesting year, and we'll need kind of all cylinders firing from our colleagues, our constituents, the community stakeholders, all of those wraparound supports. And so we're excited to get into this work with you all together. Again, we're now going to move on to item 1.3, adoption of the meeting agenda. Please note that the following agenda item was from the agenda to allow the administration additional time to review. So that's agenda item 5.3, policy 3168, cost estimate of board resolution, which is a rescission. The question is to adopt the August 20th, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting agenda as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. The August 20th, 2024 Policy and Governance meeting agenda is adopted as amended. We're now going to move on to item 1.4, approval of the committee meeting minutes. The question is to approve the June 18th, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting minutes as distributed. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. The June 18th, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting minutes are approved as distributed. We'll move on to, I guess, one of our highlights of the evening, which is public comment on agenda and non-agenda items. Tonight, we have no registered comment speakers, but we certainly always welcome our public to come and to share your thoughts, your comments, and also, flag for us any issues that we as board members don't see, but that you see as being directly impacted in various ways. So we are going to move past that portion to our item 3.0 legislative agenda, and we're going to discuss our legislative platform timeline update. I do want to note, and I want to say this just as full transparency, I have not had a chance to have a discussion with my colleagues about our legislative platform timeline. This is something that we are excited about for both the start of the year throughout the continuation of this year. I want to echo that it's really important, echoing from last year, that it's really important that we continue to have a strong alliance partnership with legislators in the area and all the work that they're doing. And so I am, for the first time, going to be hearing this timeline from Mrs. Welch, but I do want to acknowledge that I will be definitely having a heavier hand now that I am back engaged. Also want to share with my colleagues that I graduated over the weekend from my Master of Law program. So I will have—
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'll have free evenings and lots of
Congratulations.
to turn my attention to that now. So with all of that, thank you. All that being said, I'm gonna recognize Mrs. Welch to introduce the legislative platform and to share more about that with us.
Good evening.
I'm sorry, before Ms. Welch, before you go, Jonathan, you said that so quickly. Can you tell us what you graduated with? And was it a master's? What program was it? I just want to say congratulations appropriately.
Yeah. So it was a master in legal studies. Essentially, I am not a lawyer, but I have the ability and the legal understanding to navigate the law a lot more effectively than I did before. This was through Cornell Law School, so it was a great opportunity and great experience, and a lot of hard work that went into it. And I'm gotta say, like, I'm now happy to have like evenings and weekends back because, as you all know, as everyone here knows, grad school is not an easy time. So thank you for asking.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, Mrs. Welch, we'll turn to you.
Okay. So as far as the legislative platform timeline update, so we have met with all the chiefs. I'm still waiting for them to send a couple of things to me, but ultimately we have pretty much the the big picture of what are critical items for them. If you like, I can share them with you just so you can get a sense of what is the issues they see that are major. And I think they're probably pretty much in line with some of the things that this committee is thinking. One of the things that is a biggie is limiting requirements that are attached to funding. So that goes to the blueprint where there's a tremendous amount of different requirements, and a lot of times there's funding, but not enough funding to cover the cost for what you need to purchase or what kind of staff you need in order to be able to implement those types of things. The other thing is that the two biggies that came up as far as unfunded mandates are House Bill 838 that was passed last year that had to do with the fact that Prince George's County Public Schools are now required to basically give out grants to nonprofit organizations so that they can support private providers. And so that is a major concern. And for several of the division chiefs brought that up as a concern, as well as the money that's budgeted for the Office of Integrity and Compliance and what those costs entail. So those were two major things. The other thing that is a concern is that the fact that a lot of times the MSDE and AIB come up with these standards or with guidance or guidelines or timelines, except that they're frequently late with their guidance and timelines. And then they turn around and expect implementation immediately. So there has to be an ability, either they need to be on time or else there needs to be some lag in between what is being required of us and the ability for the school system to be able to put those things in place. One area that is a concern has to do with just the reporting that is required and the fact that we will probably, because of accountability, we'll probably have to make changes and come up with a new system for IT type of system. And that, of course, to operationalize that requirement of the accountability requirement, it's going to take probably additional funding as well as time to be able to put something in place to pull those things together. The other thing that came up numerous times with the different division chiefs is the fact that opposing any bill that's passed during the legislation and enacted on July 1. It's insane to think that the governor is going to pass a bill, sign off on a bill in May, and turn around and we have to be implementing it by July 1. It's an impossibility. And so several of the chiefs brought this up as a major concern, that there has to be a time lag between when a bill is passed and like a year to give us time to be able to implement, because we're a school system, there's so many things to consider. The other thing is opposing any bill that makes us responsible for private providers, monitoring them, those types of things, because it's really impossible to have that kind of control over them, as well as mandating actions that are outside of our instructional responsibility is another concern. There is a concern because ESSER funding sunsets September 30th. And so we're going to be, that's less resources that we originally used. Many of those resources in student services for mental health services for students. So those same students still need those mental health services, but now the funding has disappeared. So we continue to need that type of funding. The other area was looking at the best way to hold parents accountable for attendance and discipline, because that is a concern I know of our teachers and our teachers unions. And of course, attendance is a major concern for our students, because if you're not in school, you can't learn. So it's really important to have them there. Another issue has to do with restorative practices or restorative approaches, which is it's very well proven to work quite well and to help with discipline issues in schools. But the amount of training that's required of staff is significant. Our schools, the majority of our schools are not prepared to be able to do restorative practices, which means we need to have we really need the funding to be able to do all the training. And we actually need a restorative approaches coordinator for every school. So they could be coordinating the program as well as the training and really getting the students that need to be involved in the restorative practices. So that's something that they would like to advocate for. If the bill comes back up related to subcontracting, where last year there was a bill that came up and said that the school systems would not be allowed to subcontract, that's something we vehemently oppose, because we contract and subcontract for a lot of services for students. Our special ed services, speech pathology services, OT, PT, psych services, our mental health clinicians, or almost all of those are contracted out. So we couldn't function if there was some bill that would oppose the contracting. And then as far as information technology, I did talk to IT about AI, and Andy said if there could be standardized AI agreements at the state level with different companies that LEAs could use, versus the fact that LEAs have to sort of maneuver and try to figure out which company you can use, which you can't, based on what's going on with AI, would be excellent, as well as so accessibility is critical for our IT services. For anything that we provide electronically, there has to be accessibility. And I think 2 legislative sessions ago, there was a bill that also passed in terms of accessibility for our special ed students and students, the other, even Section 504 students. And they, so there are needs. It would be great if the state would end up coming up with a company or someone that we could be using to evaluate the accessibility of all our tools. And then as far as the climate action plan, so that's important, and definitely we support that, but we also support increased funding in all areas to address the climate action reform. That's extremely expensive. First of all, like our electric buses, one bus costs $450,000, where we normally spend $150,000. Additionally, in the cost for like construction and planning, the upfront costs are usually very high, and it takes years to realize the savings from those. The also increased cost for cleaning supplies. That's climate friendly, if we could have more money. And solar energy would definitely increase. If we're moving to solar energy, that would definitely increase the cost of school construction estimates, which could cause a problem with funding, because as you know, the CPI is actually CIP is developed several years in advance of when it actually goes into effect. So here you are doing an estimate where down the road now there's a new requirement, and we didn't, and that was not, planned for. So those were major issues. Any funding that we could receive for adequate training of staff and staff positions for metal detectors would be extremely helpful. This came from operations. They do oppose project labor agreements on major construction projects. It has been very difficult to maneuver through that. They, as far as transportation, they do oppose seatbelts on buses, and there's a lot of conflicting research related to seatbelts, so it's not that clear cut in determining whether or not that's good or not. As far as walkways, pedestrian walkways, they absolutely support that, because that's important. We have a lot of students walking in this county. However, the major responsibility of determining where the walkways are, they safe, whatever, really should be assigned to the county public works office, because they are equipped to be able to do that kind of work. The aging school program, we continue to need the continuation of that funding, because we have lots of aging schools. And the continuation of the Maryland Safe to Learn Act grants, because we still have lots of things we need to do to make our schools more safe. And we do support universal meals if it's entirely funded by the state, which actually the state, based on legislation last year, the state is right now studying that to see if that's a possibility, so that they can fund it fully for next year. So that's big picture. I haven't had a chance to really bank it down, but there were some definite recurring themes. I think unfunded mandates and giving time to be able to implement these bills, and not having us reach out beyond what our responsibilities are to our students in the instructional world, I think, are probably the most critical ones that came up. And I do know, Board Member Walker, that you had also shared some concerns also that need, from a board perspective, that really need to be considered when we put this platform together.
Yeah. And I just want to say again that so thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh, for that very thorough list of things. I know that we're gonna have in the coming weeks opportunities, you, Dr. Miller and I, to kind of talk through all of this, to hash out, and I think really have like a clear timeline on each of those various pieces. I know this is also in some ways contingent on what the General Assembly timeline looks like when you think about either continuations of funding for various bills or when they bring up a specific issue in the House or the Senate. But I do just want to echo your sentiment around coordination. I think that in a lot of large governments, they have the coordination around like having that runway that exists for whoever is responsible for implementing whatever recent changes have been put in place to be able to do that. So I think that that is essential for our school board as well and our school district as well. I do want to say that that for our colleagues we have, I will acknowledge you in the order of your raised hands. I saw the hands here. And then I think if we can just have 2.5 minutes up for those that are speaking so that we can kind of be on time here. And I'm going to turn over to Board Member Boozer Strother.
Thanks so much. This is a really great list from the chiefs, and I really appreciate you bringing this at this time of the year so we could start thinking about it. I definitely see some themes here that would be of interest to the other LEAs, if not all of them, and that could be helpful in this. So I look forward to, each of us in our different roles with May being able to have those conversations and partnerships. So I would say that should be thought about in the timeline on some of these for sure. When you mention the private providers, are you talking the pre-K
Yes.
blueprint? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if you were referencing other types of private services, especially when we got there to the subcontracting. The issues around attendance and discipline, I certainly hope that we can look at all of the recommendations nationally recognized that the experts, even ourselves, have presented before we start jumping to this parent accountability piece, because we have a lot that we haven't even fully funded yet. And I do think, speaking of the national landscape down to school systems, that we do have that in the middle there with Annapolis around where our gaps are, with transportation and other opportunities when we look at the data, and we need better data. So until we go there on attendance, we have to get our data right. Our data is not good. So we could talk about public health and others. So I'm going to keep pushing back on making this about parents until we cover all of those first. But otherwise, I really think this is a great list, and I really appreciate the chief's time. Thank you.
Okay.
And I just, because I know these are recorded and the public's going to watch, and they're going to say, when they hear a board member say things, what do they mean? So I wanted to clarify for Board Member Boozer Strother, when she says our data isn't good, is how are we kind of tracking information? How are we labeling information for students that are truant? What are the reasons behind that? And so I think we can get better at those things, but we are tracking that information. And the data is good in that sense, but how we're labeling it, I think, is something that we can get better at. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Walker.
Hey there. As always, Ms. Welsh, this is just amazing information. Like the other board members have said, thank you so much for pulling this together. So we'll be in a state to hear it. I'm always giving amazing credit to you and in the team to pull it all together. So thank you. I'm hoping that Chair Briggs, that in the meeting that you have, you can add us as optional, or you can then come back so that your committee members might have an opportunity to lean in a little bit and give some input to it. One thing I wanted to put out there was to group it. It might be helpful to group it in themes, because I like Boozer Strother heard a couple of key themes. And I know that as we talked before, the good news is the list that we had before is in alignment with exactly what you said, just with some others. So I think some key big buckets will be helpful as we talk to our legislators. I wouldn't go past, I like 3, but wouldn't go past 4. But it's for Chair Briggs to determine how he wants to outline that. But I did just want to add in that getting committee input will be very, I think, helpful in whatever form you want to do that, whether it's here in a recorded line or you want to have a side meeting so that we can kind of flesh through it. But something I know for sure I want to add in to some stuff. So thank you.
Yes, and yes, all of those things. Oh, Mrs. Welsh, go ahead. But I just want to say yes to what you said, and I do want to bring in all of those insights as well as collect information from you all. So I think there's some way we can do asynchronous or whether it's all together. But we'll think through those things. Mrs. Welsh.
So actually, first of all, definitely we'll have it grouped in themes. I was just trying to give you a big picture overview so that you have a sense of what are the things that they're looking at. Secondly, though, I am very interested, and Shelby, we're all interested in knowing specifically how the committee feels about different things. And if there's other areas that the chiefs haven't addressed, but clearly from your perspective, you see other areas, that is going to be very important as we put the platform together. So I don't know, Chair Briggs, how you want to handle it, but I think as it needs to be a conversation that's held. And if it's the entire committee, then of course, because of Opens Meeting Act, then we would just have to set that time aside. The other thing, and I hate to just ask this question again, but out of curiosity, and mainly because I did put the attendance policy back on the list for policies for this upcoming year, because I think Board Member Boozer Strother, you had requested that when Chair Briggs had asked if there's any policies anyone wants to. Are you talking specifically about the actual data that we collect in terms of when students are absent, when they're not, when they're like truant, like all those kinds of things, they're late, the reasons for it, or is there something else? I just want to make sure I understand.
There's definitely reason codes review for sure.
Okay.
Do we have reason codes for what we understand are some reasons that maybe weren't common reasons in the past? And I can think of a couple. Also the time length of lawful. We heard I think at the end of the year, even from former student member of the board, Rivera Forbes, noted bereavement leave, especially when you need to travel out of the country. So that would just give you a little bit of that.
Okay, that's good.
I also think we need to strengthen our expectations of coding and correct coding, because I will almost guarantee that the parents of 132,000 students could all show you exactly what's wrong on their attendance record for a school year and can tell you how difficult it is to get those changed. So when you know your student was a lawful illness absence, to get it changed, and then I'm sure our principals could report back when they sent out the letters this year around this chronic absenteeism, which includes lawful and unlawful. And then there's this element of the truancy that we saw sort of take on its own life this past year. They aren't the same thing.
Mhm.
And so we had a whole bunch of families called in with what I apologize for saying just bad data. You're right, Mr. Board Member Briggs. I could be a little more careful about my language there. That many just came in to say, you need to correct the codes. My child was sick, right? So, and many other reasons, which I referenced earlier, that there are 5 or 6 significant buckets of work around absenteeism that we should be focusing in on before this fallacy of threatening parents with some legal action. So that, because I don't think we'll get the results we want. I've said too much. All right, thank you.
No, this is helpful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'd love to have that conversation. And I think also when we have those discussions, Mrs. Welsh with Board Member Boozer Strother and whoever else wants to attend, just to get more clarity, because I think that you likely, as you say, you're the longest serving board member currently. You know, you bring a lot of historical wisdom. I think also you are, as a parent, really deeply connected to other parents in the community who are impacted by these things. So our policies are effective when they're actually addressing issues and not just like putting a Band-Aid to just say we did something. And I think that's how we can get them effective. I think if there are no other questions, because I don't see any other hands, we can move on to item 4.0, which is discussion items. Tonight, there are 4 items for discussion. We will have 2 rounds per discussion and vote for a 3rd round if necessary. Each discussion round per member will last 2.5 minutes, as we just did. And so we're going to move on to item 4.1, the 9,000 bylaw series update. And I recognize Mrs. Welsh to provide the committee with an update on the 9,000 bylaw series that we worked on towards the end of last school year.
So if you recall, your parliamentarian had brought to the board the idea of that we pull out, I think it was like all the information that sits in 9360, basically all the rules of how to conduct a meeting and different types of what needs to be involved with, use the different types of meetings, and call that rules of a procedure, of which then everyone, I think, voted for it and accepted that. The issue, there's 2 issues here. One is though, is that we don't have officially anything called rules. You know, we have policies, we have bylaws, but we don't have anything called rules. So my one question is this something we want to take the rules and put them into an actual policy that would be called rules of procedure? And then along with that question is, my recommendation would be, and I have talked to OGC about this also, is taking all the remaining 9,000 series, pulling out that's redundant, that we don't need to have, and moving them all over to the 8,000 series. Because if you look at the 8,000s, they're all internal policies, the board's internal policies. So, and we've had at times rescinded certain ones because what was in 9,000 was the same that was in 8,000. So my thinking would be, it might be smarter to just have, take which isn't redundant, and hit those different topics and move them over to the 8,000 series, because they are your internal policies. But I would want I need to hear how you would like to do it.
Yeah. Recognizing board member Boozer Strother.
Oh, thank you. Did you want to make any comments first?
I'm going to go last. I'm going to take some time to think, but I wanted to hear what you all shared first. So
Yeah, I think, and I apologize, this is definitely summer break kind of question. We had a meeting with our parliamentarian in a retreat in June, and we were presented with significant advice around this, and I think that even bylaws aren't even actually legitimate. We have the laws of the state that are essentially our bylaws. So I just want to make sure we're all sort of aligned about what we've been through. And again, I know I'd have to go back to some notes to remember that everything we were told that day in the retreat.
He did recommend, because I had met with him also, and he did recommend that they move to policy. But that's his recommendation. I feel that would be a committee decision if you're in agreement and you want to move them over to policies. Just because you recommend it, I'm not going to move forward until I hear from the committee that that's what they want to do. Basically.
Well, I think what we were doing was we were repeating law into bylaws, and then the laws could shift and change, and we were out of it was something more significant, like around that we were utilizing laws written by the state of Maryland and saying they were ours, like as if we wrote them for our own body. So I think we're going to have to circle back to that and get clarity on all that.
Yeah. Can I chime in here? Just because I know that, Robin, you had the discussion with you and I had a discussion with Mr. Swift last year around this time. We made the distinction between policies, bylaws, and now you're adding in rules, which I think wasn't a conversation that Mr. Swift had with us at this meeting that happened in June. The discussion there was essentially what Board Member Boozer Strother is saying, which is that we talked about the laws that exist. We have certain, bylaws that, air quotes, bylaws that exist that are saying essentially either the same thing or redundant to those laws, but we can't supersede a law. And so that was a discussion. So he was kind of just giving us like a rundown, like a one-on-one on what's the distinction between a bylaw and a policy. I think we're saying the same thing here. And I think that we're on track to do what we were talking about. And you just added in, I think, maybe this additional complexity of rules. But it's no different than what we've been talking about. So I just want to say that just for context, so that you're not like that. And I also don't, I'm sorry, I took your time. So I think you had like maybe 34, 40, 45 minutes, seconds left there. Board Member Bruce Strother and Mrs. Welsh.
Oh, no, I good. You helped connect the dots that we actually did not talk about this term rules that day,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, thank you. I'm finished.
And can I just add one more thing to that, Chair Briggs, is that I do agree with him. Of course, most of your policies, well, a majority of your policies are driven by law. But also for convenience of the board, I mean, which board member is going to sit and pull up and look up the law to figure out what to do about something? So to have it in policy makes it helps with the operation of the board in terms of I can go to policy here and this provides this or this.
Yeah, I will jump in, but it was very specifically Comar's laws. It was very specifically Comar, not legislative law. It's the operation of the board where we were getting ourselves in trouble. That was the context of it, not policies in response to, say, specific legislation, if that makes sense.
It was so it was the coding, the like she said, the coding of Comar, as MSD has the responsibilities of telling the state what they have to do, those regulations. So that's what but I think we're still saying the same thing, which is that and I think also what we talked about was we can reference in the specific policy, the policy now, where we can say in that specific code what it's talking about. So if you want to refer back to what it specifically says in that code, you can go there versus taking our word for it, because we should always make sure that our directors are like aligning with what the actual law says versus what we're saying, because we don't have that authority. Is what he was essentially letting us know. I'm going to turn to Chair Walker.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, in alignment with the discussion, but the good news is that the parliamentarian not only talked at this meeting, but also at our retreat. And for the August 29th, where every board member was given these proposed rules of procedure that day, as well as went through the 9,000 series to understand the redundancies. But Ms. Welsh, part of the concern was that when it's listed as a bylaw, it gives board members the false impression that we actually can change it. Like in this meeting, we'll be talking about what we want to modify, but the reality is, guess what? It's a state law and there's no modifications happening. So what he did, the parliamentarian was able to do, is put together a drafted rules of procedure, whereby in our August 29th meeting that we're going to have live, everyone will get that, and they'll have this draft up front inside of our executive piece, where they already have it and they've had it for a while, but they'll get it again. And we'll go through a process one by one to ensure that everybody's clear and we're saying the same thing. But I'm saying that to say that the whole rules of procedure, we'll make sure, because I'm pretty sure, I don't have it in front of me, but I'll send it to you tomorrow or tonight. I'm pretty sure that we adopt this notion of rules of procedure up front of the discussion. So let me send it to you and I'll resend it to Mr. Briggs, and so he can send it to our committee, but we do have it. And I think Mr. Farrar and Ravel were also on a call too. But it's been a summer and we'll get all of it back. But I just want everybody to know it is on the August 29th meeting to go through rule by rule to adopt, so that we're not redundant and we're not having a false impression. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dr. Miller.
Good evening. Thank you. And please pardon me if I'm being redundant with this question, but I'm seeking clarity. So with the rules of procedure, Ms. Welsh, you stated that the parliamentarian recommended they go on to policy. If we were to do that, could we ensure that the guidelines, that they're only changed as the state law changes? I guess that's where I'm trying to Because this is what we're operating by. Should we do that? And if not, then how do we ensure that we only manipulate them as state law changes?
So one thing, first of all, the rules of procedure, I was just asking the question, do you want to call them policy? But I did not know that on the 29th, you're going to actually be you're going to go through each of the rules and vote on that. So that sort of changes that for me. But the remaining, and he pointed out, I remember his notes, he pointed out which of the bylaws fall under the rules of procedures. But then there's still a bunch of bylaws that are sitting out there. So those ones that are sitting out there, and I do remember him recommending policy, and I'm in agreement, as well as OGC is in agreement, and moving them over to policy. I do want to tell you though that we have gone in to make changes, like we did make, I think the one had to do with the chair and with the student board member, and the only reason we made those changes was because of House Bill 1079. So there was a change in the law, and so we knew we had to update those bylaws to ensure that it reflected current law. So, and between you and me, if we don't have to change policy, that's perfectly fine. But if the law is requiring a change, then we absolutely have to update it to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the law.
And I was just going to echo that, Dr. Miller, because I think you can rest assured. I actually talked to Mrs. Welsh about this, and they have an entire legislative process where they look at updated laws, a law that was amended throughout for each school year. And so they're keeping track of that. One, because it's a mandate, like we have to do that, right? You can't not update those pieces. But also I think because that's just a part of the tasks of the jobs that they have. So I think that should be an issue. But I think for the directors, again, if we can have a reference in there to like where they can go just to see it, then that helps them to understand. And also for board members, I think, to have for their own fruition. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can move. Our outro, and I'm gonna do the question is on amending the 9,000 bylaw series per Mr. Swift's recommendation to reflect their status as board policies, which is the only thing that Mrs. Welsh was asking. I think we can talk about whether other pieces are added to the 8,000 series. Is there a second?
Can you restate that one more time, please?
Yeah.
The question is on amending the 9,000 bylaw series to reflect their status as board policies. So we're no longer using.
I just have a question. Are we in discussion? Well, the second, so that we can get to the discussion.
Yes.
A second.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. So it's moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes.
Okay, Chair Walker.
Okay, thank you so much. Hey, the 9,000 series are policies, correct?
Their bylaw.
Bylaw, okay, yes, the idea is to move them to policies. Okay, got it. I just wanted to make sure the difference. I'm pretty sure on that. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and that's why I was just trying to give that briefer, because I know a lot of this is lost in like the last month and a half that we haven't been here. But that was just essentially changing from bylaws to policies, because technically every other school district in the state of Maryland only has policies, and the bylaw only for the rules that govern the procedures of the board. So that was what we were trying to be in alignment with. So
I just asked, I'm so sorry, because my brain over the course of it. Hey, Mr. Farrar and Ravel, was it policies? Just, can you get me back right after we had that conversation with the parliamentarian? I think it's a yes here for what I just want to make sure I'm voting on the right thing.
policies for, maybe you might want to get clarified.
Oh, I'm sorry. So when the rules of procedure, I know the 9,000 series bylaws, thank you very much, will be going away for all the reasons we just discussed. When we take a look at the rules of procedure, those were to turn it into policies as we discussed, right? I know what Jonathan said, and I absolutely believe him. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for clearing me up. I just want to make sure that as I talked and was in alignment with the parliamentarian, that's exactly what I was saying there too.
Right, yeah, yes, exactly. And so those rules that he had proposed will become policies, yes.
Okay, thank you, because I know I talked to him and I know we had this discussion. I just want to make sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So
Great.
yes, Jonathan, I'm in alignment. Thank you.
Great. Are there any objections to amending the 9,000 bylaw series to reflect their status as board policies? Hearing none, the motion passes. The 9,000 bylaw series will be amended to reflect their status as board policies. We're going to move on to item 4.2, policy 6153, field trips. Mrs. Welsh, I'll turn to you to provide the committee with an update on policy 6153, field trips.
So at the last meeting, there was a conversation about, I think actually, Chair Briggs, you had brought up the fact that you had received information from constituents that they're concerned. They felt that the process to be able to go on a field trip was cumbersome and needed to be really refined or like streamlined or whatever. So I didn't have your notes until just now, and I'm gonna go back and address them in a minute, but I didn't put any language in here because I went back and I looked at each, the AP, the administrative procedure, and went through each of the field trip forms. And actually, when you look at what is sitting in the AP and what are the, what is required as far as the forms and everything, it's really all things that they absolutely need to have. For example, you are gonna, like, the teacher has to request that they like to go on a field trip, and why, you know, how does it relate to curriculum? Then they provide a sample permission slip, so that can be sent out to the parents, and it's either in English, French, or Spanish. And then they have a sheet that lists out who are gonna be the chaperones for the trip. It's really for organizational purposes for the principal, so that they know what they have there. And then there's a sheet that talks about participating student contact information, which you really should take with you when you go on a field trip in case there's some type of emergency situation and you have to get a hold of the parents. And then the other issue is a notification to the school nurse of the field trip, which has to be done in 30 days. And that is really critical because of the fact that we have many students that are on different types of medications or need to have the nurse available at certain times, depending on what their medical needs are. And so one of two things, the nurse either has to train someone to be able to give the medication, or if it's the type that you can give, or we have to work it out to ensure that we can get a nurse to go on the trip, because we cannot deny a student who has medical needs the opportunity to go on a field trip. And so to ensure that we can get all that in place, that you need that 30-day timeline. And if we don't do that and we can't get like say a nurse or whatever, then the field trip, that's the end of the field trip, because we will not provide it for all students and not provide it for a student that, you know, has some medical situation. And then the last thing was a waiver for trips to amusement parks, which is in English, French, and Spanish. And it has to do with when they go to amusement, if they do decide to go to an amusement park as a field trip, that would be, the concern would be getting into any kind of water, whatever rides or water, like, you know, I think Six Flags has the wave thing where you can get in the waves, because several years ago there was a serious accident with one of our students on the wave thing, and that student ended up passing away from that accident. And so our risk management office did a lot of research on it and said we just can never allow students to be, you know, in that type of thing while they're on a school field trip. So that's the piece that's put in place. So I'm looking at all the information. So looking at what the AP is requiring, they're really basics for being able to do a field trip. So now I'm looking at the comments that the person, wherever that provide you this information, and first it says that students go on very few field trips. So that's not really related to you know, the AP, because I'm not sure why they don't go on field trips. It says it's only about special academic programs. Now, there are certain requirements in the curriculum that the students must go on certain field trips related to the curriculum. I don't know if that's what they're referring to. But then it says, what if you don't attend a specialty school? Maybe, I guess they're referencing like our academies and stuff. But field trips are open to all the schools, and of course it's up to the principal to ensure that you know, they encourage their teachers to take advantage of those field trips. The other thing is we can't use PGCPS buses for school trips. So they might not be able to use the buses, but they absolutely can contract out for bus service. And then that I don't know what they mean by field trips returned. I don't know if that means they left and came back. I'm not sure what that means. And that says, is there a report IDs and principals have to submit? Well, they do have to submit this information about their field trip. Let me see. It is true, many of our community schools do have much larger budget, and that is partly related to the blueprint, where we do have, bigger budgets for that, so they do have more opportunities. Let's see. As far as the buses not confirming whether they can book them or not, I can't help them with that. I don't know what that's about. I'm just looking at the things that they have provided. Much of it is no information on transportation carriers. So that's something, and I'll say something in a minute, and the budget is limited. So of course, I'm not sure if that's up to the principal to assign within their budget how much they want to do towards field trips. And then, and they say that previously you had to submit where you're going, what dates, and how much it costs. Well, that's based pretty much what they have to do with all the paperwork that I reviewed. I will say this though, a couple things. One is that we actually have a meeting set up in September to go through the field trip administrative procedure. So my office worked with risk management. We had a request from I think a constituent that actually spoke with Board Member Boozer Strother, first of all, about chaperones and the ratio, because the ratio was extremely high. You had to have so many chaperones for how many students, as well as you had to have that same matching number of staff. And so it ended up limiting the number of field trips you could go on. Well, first of all, because oftentimes principals don't want to pull that many staff out of their building because they're already short on staff in the building. And secondly, it was the number of the cost became prohibitive for parents because of that many chaperones that were going along. So if you went on an overnight trip, you're talking all that cost that was involved. So we did do research. We also worked with Peacock. But we looked at every county, all these counties, and then risk management was involved. And we actually have lowered that ratio. So there will be fewer chaperones required, as well as we are not requiring a match to staff. So we did provide all that information over to the school division. And at this point, we are awaiting their approval on that. But in the meantime, and that was done way back. And then on top of that, we are having a meeting though, because of your request, to see if there's any way that we can streamline anything. And this is extremely helpful, because when we have this meeting, there's lots of representatives from the schools and from risk management and from just a wide variety. Even community schools will be there purchasing for contracts. And all of these, I think these questions or concerns that this person brought to your attention will be things that I can share with that committee to address, because I'm going to have every player at the table that has some role in all these things. So I have not put any language in it, because the way the administrative procedure sits itself, it's really pretty clear cut and not that extensive. I think it's all the nitty-gritty detail of getting the stuff taken care of, which I think it will be a good opportunity to share with the schools and with purchasing and everything, the concerns that they run into when they're attempting to like book a bus, or what's happening. Certain principals allow trips, certain principals don't, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, Mrs. Welsh, I want to first say thank you for taking the time to really review thoroughly the policy and the procedures. I think you brought up some really valuable points, which are that, a lot of this is how that kind of AP lines out everything from the board policy. I do still think that there are some concerns that we can impact. Likely it may not be through this specific policy. For example, I think the field trips, right? Like, or the buses, what they were saying there was that the buses they can't use the buses that they use for delivering students to and from school. So they have to go, as you said, through an outside company. But a lot of times they need that information immediately. And the way the process goes is by the time they get approval, either for the field trip budget or they get approval for that form, the bus companies are like, hey, you needed to let us know like 3 weeks ago, we can't book you. So part of that was that they were saying that just the timing is off. And one of the kind of advocates in that group was a teacher. So this was a person who's saying, you know, I tried to do this process. So I think there's things we can do, but one of the other pieces was that they were saying that if there is some way to audit how many field trips were happening. And I think part of this was like pre-COVID, post-COVID. Apparently, according to some of them, there was like a form and there was a process that existed before that was a lot easier. Previously, they said that you had to submit field trip info, including where you were going, what dates, and how much it costs. Then you could move through the next phase of the work. The old way was a lot faster, and it provided more runway. I think this new process is like the timing is just off. So I think there are still some things that we can do, because I do think field trips are an essential enriching opportunity for students. Just sitting in four walls every day and reading a book, or hearing a lecture or
Right.
whatever it is, right? If you're doing play-based activities, it still doesn't really suffice for, I think, having the opportunity to leave and see things in person, and our students in Prince George just kind of deserve that. So this is something that I do feel strongly about in that sense, but I do want to turn it over to other board members, and I'll turn it over to Board Member Boozer Strother.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad we're looking at this as well to be really clear on what's the difficulties, policy versus administrative procedure, because I know quite a bit of the administrative procedure, it has been the difficulty, and I'm grateful that the movement is happening. I mean, all of that, actually the timeline as it comes out of when there were many safety policies made in a moment of crisis around 2016, and that's when the chaperone numbers changed, and the quite a few of the measures in place that made it more difficult to schedule field trips came out of that. I do think the bus access is a post-COVID thing for sure, of the drivers. So I know that's jamming that up. But one of the issues, and I believe this is on the AP side, although it's referenced in our policy, that was holding up a lot of schools was, and especially we have quite a few schools, and I would say even in my district, where you do have a lot of newcomers, and you have a change of your class roster almost every day. I mean, if you ask our middle schools and high schools, and so there was this requirement that you had to have an accurate list of students who would be going on this field trip in a month, 2 months, 3 months, which was impossible. And that was, I know that caused difficulties. This is that period 2016 to COVID closure, that list of students, there was some sort of lock on that list that was problematic. So I'd like us to take a closer look at that, if that is still an issue, and if our policy could be more clear that there's the list of students when you register for the field trip, and then there's the list of students that actually go on the field trip. And are we causing issues there with our policy? But the others, it does sound like progress is being made on the AP side, and it did pop up. I agree with Chair Briggs that I heard about it so much more this year from different PTAs and schools, that field trips just couldn't happen this year, particularly the elementary levels, and lots of frustration with what everyone thought was paperwork and responsiveness. So we have to get to the bottom of it. With this one. Thanks.
And it could very well be, I'm just thinking, it could very well be that they go through the trouble of getting all this stuff there, but then they're not getting a response back, and then it holds up part of the process, which is something that I will definitely follow up with, especially when I meet with this group to find out what's actually happening, when they're doing the field trips. And I do agree with you about the names of the students, because they are changing all the time. You can't anticipate who your students are going to be 30 days from now. That would be something that would, and according to the person who works with me, who actually also looked into this, the purpose of this list of the students was not necessarily for the board office to have the information, but, and I just know this from my experience of being a teacher and going on field trips, you absolutely want to make sure you have the names of all your students and their parents' names and their phone numbers so that you're prepared in case you do have to get a hold of a parent or something for an emergency situation. So it's really more functional. They send all this information to the area office, so I'm not certain why the area office would even need that information. I mean, that doesn't even make sense to me because it's, I mean, they're not doing anything. It would be, you know, either the school or like say the teacher who might be calling the school to say, call this parent or do whatever. So, and I can check into that. And as far as like the chaperones and stuff, we now have everything, all the volunteers, it's all electronically tracked. So it takes 2 seconds for them to look up to find out whether or not like their chaperones have been fingerprinted, going through CPS clearance, you know, the training, whatever. I mean, it's a very simple process compared to how it used to be. So, the only thing we have to get is the ratios, you know, get agreement from the school division that they're willing to drop that ratio for us so that we don't need to have that in place. But I'm not, again, so we will be going back through the AP then and making any revisions to the AP. I would suggest that that should be sitting in the AP, the things that you're sharing with me. I'm not sure the policy is necessarily a place that you would put that kind of,
Well-
you know, language, but I will definitely take this back and look at where things are getting hung up so that we can and find out what the practices really are. And I like the idea of doing an audit just to see how many school, you know, which schools are going, what trips they go on. I mean, really, that should be something that they have right online that you can look and see, like for each school, how many field trips they went on and, you know, where they went, that kind of thing. So I appreciate this information.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is gonna, you know, continue this kind of discussion, but I do want to say that I think also if it's more helpful, maybe the board requests some type of report on field trips, because I think that right now there's,
Oh,
you know, if it's an issue that there has been a decline in the field trips, and then we can collect more information on why, maybe this is tabling this policy and figuring out more. I don't want to just address the policy just to kind of like, you know, again, we're throwing darts and just trying to like address small things. If we can kind of be global with this, then I think that that's something that we can do. And I would prefer to maybe take under consideration, I think the suggestion to have that report. I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you so much. I don't want to, I echo everything everyone has said in terms of field trips being an invaluable part of the curriculum, very invaluable. There are times when they are displays, like the human body display comes to the Maryland Science Center and it's only there for like 20 days and a teacher needs to take it. So I want to back up. I like the idea of an audit. I'd like to suggest or just open up for consideration as you do the audit. We do know the field trips are declining, right? And maybe as we figure out why, you know, from some of the teachers, but there could be some feedback we can get from teachers who have just chosen not to take them. They would have gone, but have chosen not to take them because of some of the challenges. So we can see a trend of what are the challenges we're seeing across the board. And maybe we can even disaggregate it from elementary, middle, and high, because the challenges may be different depending on the level. That way, when we're looking at the AP and the policy, we're able to address it appropriately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think like maybe this is I hear you, Mrs. Welsh. You can correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm interpreting, but I'm hearing you say like, should we move forward on this policy? Should we not? I'm wondering if maybe the discussion is, should we collect more information, and should we and then decide what we should do after we do that?
we can do that, but I don't know. I mean, that's fine. As that's your call. We can certainly do that. I don't know. They might not have been collecting information is what I'm wondering. I don't know. So that's the only problem. I do think though that your idea of putting a report into the policy so that automatically it has to be reported out to the board once a year of what all the field trips they went, like elementary, middle, high school, that kind of thing. You can see everything. I think that's a very good idea.
And I don't want to make this process bureaucratic because I think we, of course, owe it to the public to be responsive to like a, a need that they've brought to our attention. And I hear people saying that this is from, practitioners who are doing the work to parents who see it every day. So I don't want to like say, let's wait another year and collect information. But I do think that there's maybe something to like collecting at least some more information on this. And
Okay.
your wisdom of saying, let's not just be so hasty to move forward, I think is helpful, but I also don't know if it doesn't rise to the occasion of us doing anything. Chair Walker.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just want to help us to move forward with, I'm in alignment with getting more information by way of a form. I think that when we put that even out to parents, we'll really learn what the true reason is that it's declining. One of them I know tremendously because I do field trips during the school year is the fingerprinting. And so we just need to hear that so then we can root cause it effectively. I'm in alignment. I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Sorry, Board Member Boozer-Strother.
Yeah, thank you. In alignment to get more data as well. And, since it is the beginning of the school year, if there's, I mean, I know we've been hearing some of these themes for years, but maybe there's a tool. So instead of me going to a PTA meeting to hear for the first time how much the school is struggling, to get a field trip accomplished, maybe there's some type of tool where the educators or the principals can like say like, this is real time. Like, this is my real gap here. Like why I can't get this field trip accomplished. Like, I don't know if there's some, data collection, Google form or something where we get this, because I think it keeps ending up being a little anecdotal. And then, then there was the, I was very appreciative that administration, did quickly move on a major high school trip this year, recognizing that chaperones was definitely aging in its, necessity around the time period it was enacted. But I do feel like there's just a lot that there's not anything official that maybe we could push a little bit, like that our conversation here tonight can help with, that could be helpful in the system.
One thing I have to share, so we could send out a Survey Monkey survey that would come back. It would be anonymous, but it would provide some information. I have to find out though whether or not, I mean, it's just our office, so I don't know that they allow us to like send it out to all teachers or whatever, versus like maybe sending it to all principals or something, or I don't know. But when I meet with this committee in September, it's like the third week in September, I'm going to bring this up, and based on the conversation tonight, maybe put together that and at least gather as much information from that, because the Survey Monkey actually will categorize for you, put it all, it's in nice charts and everything, and you can see all the pieces to it. So we could do that, as well as I will check with the area offices to see, have they been collecting any information all this time? And if so, what information do they have? But I would recommend, Chair Briggs, that we don't bring this back until October, just because it is the beginning of the year. People are very busy in September, as the year starts. So just getting time to pull all this information together, because that's not going to be the top thing on their minds right away. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, I think people are surveyed out. And I don't want this year to be, I really don't. I don't want this year to be like, let's send a survey, because eventually it's going to be that they're not going to respond. I wonder if we can start to integrate. I'm not saying a forever survey where it's like you're answering 1,000 questions, but if there's a survey that's on its way out to the staff and the principals, then maybe we could find some way to have like work internally to get that integrated into there. So just like a few essential questions, like what are the things we want to ask about this? It could be 3 questions, right? It's not like a 10-question thing, and it's just in there. So that way we get the participation and we can have like a good sample size to kind of aggregate and look at, versus I think, because we'll see larger trends. We'll answer the question of, does this rise to the occasion of doing something? And maybe what we assume is the problem really isn't the problem. And I think the purpose is, if we can get more information, then we can know for sure.
Okay.
So I wonder if maybe the answer is not creating more work for everyone, but just like figuring out a way to like get down those questions, 3 questions, and then when there's a survey that's going out, getting that integrated into the whatever survey we can manipulate.
I will check on that.
So the question is, okay, Chair Walker.
No problem. Just, I love the integration piece, just ensuring that we're asking parents as well. Thanks.
And I wonder if, for that piece, because again, I love the idea of integration and like making things easier, because I feel like we do them if we make them easier for ourselves. Once the policy is actually up for discussion and then we have public comment, if we can really do an actionable like effort to get parents to be involved and community members, like I think that would just naturally
Sounds
flow
great. Yeah,
versus
that's perfect.
do all this extra work.
Also, I think we could, whatever the questions are, share with PCAC.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so the question is to submit policy 6153 to the superintendent designee for approval. I think we're now going to scrap that discussion, and we're looking to hear back from you, Mrs. Welsh, about getting it integrated into a survey, and then of course we'll move forward with the parent piece. So before I move forward, Cindy, Mrs. Adlin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Briggs. I think the vote now should be to postpone the bylaw until the October meeting.
Okay. The bylaw or the policy?
That.
Okay. All right. So the question is to postpone policy 6153 until the October P&G meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Policy 6153 field trips will be postponed until the October meeting where we'll revisit this discussion. So we're going to move on to
With the actions that you already outlined. Right.
With the actions that were outlined. Yes. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to item 4.3, policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process. I want to recognize Mrs. Welsh to provide the committee with an update on policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process.
So that policy, actually had gone out for public comment, and after the fact, we did receive a public comment and as relates to special ed and the principal selection process. So I don't know if you recall, but at the very last meeting where it was sort of a little rushed and we were going through it, we talked about this, but said, let's just bring it back to this meeting and we can have a conversation about it. So I'm going to refresh your memory about the public comment, and then get your thoughts on it, as well as possibly make a proposal for the change in the language to that policy before it moves out to the board to go through the rest of the steps. In that policy, it talks about first round of interviews and about when they're looking at the administrators, that's more of an internal thing. The person has recommended that the eligible candidate should have to demonstrate they have experience with key elements of special education, and that they know the case law, and they've had training in that area and whatever. So the one thing, I did speak with HR about this, and they actually are required, it's a licensure requirement for principals that they must take at least one special education course. And when they're doing internal interviews, they do often ask, now that's internally before it goes out to the community, they do ask specific questions about that. So in essence, as far as being able to demonstrate key elements of special education, I'm not certain that could be that specific in that process. I mean, they can ask questions, but I don't know how you demonstrate key elements at that point. The other one was that when the second round of interviews, if you recall, goes out, then that you include the community, where you have parents as well as some students for that particular school. And it talks about having at least 2 of the people shall represent special education 504 students. And again, I did speak with HR, and the concern is, what they said is they could certainly make the effort to get at least one parent of a special education student. However, they, because you're looking at, I think it's 4 specific community members or whatever, to do 2 of the 4 is, it's actually a little disproportionate to our population of special education students. And so the recommendation, and the other thing is, they can request to get a parent of a student in special ed. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get that parent. So the recommendation was that we change the policy to say that one of the parents in that interview committee or whatever would be a parent of a special education / 504 student. So the recommendation right now, based on the public comment, would be that we do add that piece about the parent of the special education student making sure you have one member of the community interview committee be that. If you think differently in terms of the first recommendation, which had to do with demonstrating experience with key elements of special education, then I'll have to rely on you to share what your thoughts are related to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Walker, and then I'm going to, turn it over to Chair Walker.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Welsh, was there a recommendation on how we would choose that parent? Do they come from the DIAB committee? Where do they come from?
They come from that school's community. So
Yeah.
you're now at the point, they have this, they've gone through the whole, aspiring leadership program, and then they've had this first set of interviews, and now these people are coming to the school. And so that's when it's a parent of the school that needs the principal. So it would have to be,
Oh,
yeah, because they also include a student of this. I think it's at least 1 or 2 students of that school. So it's the idea of getting, community involvement from the school that is getting a new principal.
okay, thank you. And then the other piece, I'm not going to do my discussion piece right here. It's just a question, a couple clarifying questions. But then what happens if is the idea that they would look at all the resumes and then they would choose who, like if this person is appropriate for their school after the superintendent recommends? Is that what the idea is, or that they then would recommend to the superintendent who he looks at?
They do provide a recommendation to the superintendent.
Thank
They
you.
do interviewing. They have interview questions and everything, and then based on that interview, they will then share their recommendation with the superintendent.
Okay.
Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you so much. This is also for clarity. Explain, I just wanted to get some clarity of when you said that if they selected a parent of a student with special education, that there would be some disproportionality. Explain, can you clarify that statement for me?
Just from the standpoint of, if you look at the percentage of students who receive special education services, unless it might be, well, we don't even really have special centers anymore, but generally speaking, where you look at your number of parents that have students at the school, then generally speaking, the percentage probably is maybe 10 to 13% the students, the parents that have students in special ed, just looking at our percentage for students. So if you're looking at representation of the people in the community that go to that school, that might be over representation when you're looking at ensuring that you're trying to get, I mean, you would like, if you just look at your population, I mean, now I do think like some of the early childhood centers where there's a lot more special education programs, then that would be different. I mean, you could even put language, at least one parent. I mean, they could always add more, but just saying the minimum requirement is to go for at least one parent. Because depending on the school, you might have other populations that you want to make sure you represent on the interview committee.
And do they have a specific number of community members who would be invited to this panel? Once
It's 4, I think.
4, okay.
Yeah.
only ask because I know some of the parents in my district, they felt strongly about it, and the sentiment around it was they wanted to ensure that the principals who were selected had a working knowledge of special education. And I do recognize that every principal and every assistant principal does have to have 6 hours of special education
Yeah.
training prior to receiving their certification.
And I will tell you that I did suggest to our associate superintendent of special ed, that Safe Schools does have like an overview course on special education, that if in fact, she felt was appropriate, I have not heard back from her, but that is something we could consider doing, is just having them, the principals be one of their training requirements for the year, so that they would, all principals, because it doesn't ever hurt. I used to be a special ed director many years ago. It really doesn't hurt to make sure that our principals are well informed about the requirements in special education. It's probably one of the areas that's most laden with so many requirements that it's really important that they understand what needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. And I just want to silently recognize Cindy, who got rid of outro that we've been dealing with for half the night. But I do like some type of ping, just so we know. I did want to just say, Mrs. Welsh, that I don't think this is for this policy. I'm not sure if this goes to another policy we just recently changed. My only concern is that I think all of that makes sense. I think proportionally having one special education parent makes sense. But I do think that not every parent is equally educated on special education, even if they have a child in it. I talk to parents who, unfortunately, when they're talking to a person at their school about it, they don't understand why, their child was suggested for something, or when, or, what requirements exist. And I feel like if you ask someone to give their opinion about something, just because they have exposure to it doesn't mean they understand. I really would want to ensure that we have some type of training for parents at the district level, if they have a child in special education, because I think that that's just only fair. It's like you can't advocate adequately for anything if you don't really understand it. And maybe this is another policy that impacts this one.
I will say this, the CCAC, actually, they do provide ongoing training all the time for parents. If you go on the website, you'll see they have like constant training that parents can take advantage of for all different aspects of special ed.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's like, if we have language in there that's like a parent who signs up is receiving something from PGCPS about these training opportunities before the interview, so that they know as they're like ramping up to it, they can go to these trainings, they have these opportunities, and they're like educated on the issue. I just would want to have something that's like in there, just so we're not assuming that everyone is coming with the same knowledge. I don't see any other hands. So the question is to submit policy 4113 to the superintendent designee for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, are there any objections? This feels redundant, to submitting policy 4113 to the superintendent designee for approval. Hearing none, the motion passes. Policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process, will be submitted to the superintendent designee for approval. We're going to move on to item 4.4, policy 8100, Board of Education standing committees and focus work groups. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Welsh to provide the committee with an update on policy 8100, Board of Education standing committees and focus work groups.
Okay, Cindy, do you mind putting that up on the screen, please? Okay, so with this policy, I will say overall that throughout the so we just reviewed this policy back in I want to say 2023. It's not a very old policy. Yeah, April 27-23. It's 1 year old. So I did go through and change the CEO to superintendent throughout it, but the purpose of the actual bringing this policy forward was to include the audit committee in the Board of Ed standing committees. So if you go to page 5, Cindy, there's where the information is about the audit. Well, I'd take it back. Before you go there, just so because we now have another committee, if you slide down to the meeting schedule, scroll down, Cindy, I'm sorry. where it talks about the meeting schedule. So now we have another committee, so, and I just put this in because I thought maybe this was how you want to do it, but clearly if you want to change the dates, that's fine. So I added for introduction of committee members, it would be December for the audit committee, and then progress report would be in March. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, outcomes and outputs, that would be for the audit committee in June. And now if you scroll down to the actual audit committee information, and it talks about so the first part I talked about is this is similar like to the rest of the descriptions of the committee in terms of what the role and function of the committee is. So if you go to the law says that the school system must have an audit committee, the school board, I should say, must have an audit committee. And that the purpose of that committee, it's charged with ensuring that public funds are spent equitably across all schools in Prince George's County Public Schools. So I put that right into what the role of that committee is, because I think that's a critical piece. And then I also included that the audit committee shall review the financial reporting process, the audit process, the PGPS system, and internal wait a minute, I think I missed the word there, audit, I have to put that in, and status reports on recommendations and corrective action items proposed by Prince George's County internal audit and external auditors. And then the audit committee shall focus on prior internal control issues and how they've been resolved, complex accounting and reporting areas and how management addresses them, current audits by external internal audit, and significant accounting policies, judgments, the management estimates, and their impact on the financial statements. I did add this only because I also saw that for the committee related to the budget, that is operations, budget, and fiscal affairs. It talks about the district's director of internal audit should attend those meetings. And I was thinking, and of course we can certainly take it out, but I was thinking it probably would be appropriate to have the board's director of internal audit attend those meetings and the standing committee, only because of the fact that that particular person is going to be provide probably a lot of information about what's going on with the audits, as well as, and I only know this because our office has now been involved with audits, and I relied a lot on internal audit because they have been involved with like the OLA audits, the MSDE audits, so they know a lot, and they also the external audits from our private auditors, so they have a lot of information in that arena, and I think would be able to provide that committee with a lot of information as they work through their responsibilities. And then I think that is the only other change that I put into this AP or this policy. So anyway, that's it, but please let me know if you want any other changes.
Great. Board Member Boozer Strother. Yeah, I do want to sorry, before you go, that we did have our vice chair hop off because she had a prior engagement. We're still at quorum, but just want to acknowledge that she's no longer here.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for updating this. Couple of things. We don't typically have a business meeting in December, so we would move this up. So the chair of the audit committee, board member Jackson, and I actually did meet recently, and we discussed aligning with operations, budget, and fiscal affairs. And you were right, the audit work plan of that committee is leaving that committee and coming into audit. So the internal audit director now works with the audit committee. They are not
okay, good.
They won't be in the agenda in the same way as the topics of audit are leaving that agenda, that monthly agenda. And we're in transition, and that's why the chair and vice chair of the operation, budget, and fiscal affairs sits on the audit committee, because we're in that transition of not board knowledge and everything. So that we're definitely in transition. So details may change, but there are other aspects of our work and that should, we risk the risk management audits and others. I do feel like I had sent in a description previously when I was worried that we needed this in there as quickly as possible. And then we all agreed that the law covers us and that the audit committee could do our work without being in there. I did notice, just copy edit, I did see a PGCPS in there that had the letters transposed.
Thank you.
But so we could, the audit committee could be aligned with operations, budget, and fiscal affairs, because we just don't have a December meeting to then start that alignment.
So you're
And
saying put it at September, the same time the other one's doing but the operations, budget, and fiscal affairs committee is reporting out.
well, and this is this is one of those first year issues. It won't be an issue in the future, but in this first year, the committee's first meeting happens to be in the week after that September meeting. It happens to be the first week of October. So the committee in this first year won't actually discuss and do our own approval of the work plan on that September timeline. So our thought was that we would request of our colleagues in this first year that it would be in November, but we felt that it should go in September with operations and budget committee. I hope that makes sense. That we would call upon the chair of the board, Chair Walker, to allow that report to not be in September this year, but then it would always be in September because the work is underway. Does that make sense?
So we would put it, right now for policy purposes, it would still say September, but you would request that you'd be able to do it later. That committee would request.
Just in
extension.
year one. So I'm just
Yes.
calling out that it's only a year one problem, because we will not be able to actually review our work plan until October, which probably will not be an issue next year, because that committee would probably meet in late August or September. And be on the same timeline.
Send an email. No problem. Thank you.
I do see though that you do have one board meeting in December on the, what is it, the 5th? It's a business meeting.
Yeah, that should be the one that we're I think the budget piece where we're actually going to start. Or is that the budget? I know it's one, yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, that
Isn't-
we do have it in there, but every year something happens.
That we don't have it.
becomes
Okay.
The superintendent's budget presentation.
Isn't that one mandated? Don't we have to have it that week? I think it's like a
Yes.
first week. Yeah, so I think we already had that
Yeah.
one.
Isn't
Yeah.
that a meeting where you, apologize, isn't that where you elect your chair and vice chair?
That happens
Oh,
on
right.
first Monday. So I'm looking at the
Oh, the first
calendar now.
Monday, yeah.
That's a special
It is.
meetings to swear in new board members and elect the chair. There is a business meeting scheduled for Thursday, December 5th, but like I'm drawing a little more on history here, that there's often disruption with our December meetings that has happened for multiple reasons. So but we could, of course, do the audit committee work plan in December, but we, as the first chair and vice chair, feel like structurally, annually, that we should be out early, that work plan should be aligned with the budget, operations and budget, that we are saying what the audit plan is for the year as early as possible for the
Okay.
school system. So
Okay.
that's a second piece of it, no matter what happens with a December meeting.
Got it. Okay.
And I'm just gonna say, Ms. Adlian, I think I saw your hand. I'm sure if you want to say anything about the schedule.
I did, but I kind of thought about it. I was just gonna say that in December, according to bylaw 9361, the board should hold a business meeting in December. May, August, November, and December should have one business meeting, and business meeting twice every other month.
Yeah, and one correction, I apologize. Our first meeting actually this year will be Tuesday, the 3rd. I think it's more about just the first year's startup that we may not be ready till October. So I just want to correct that I didn't quite state our concerns about meeting that deadline this year.
Okay. And let me ask you a couple questions. So the fact that I'm just looking at the operations budget and fiscal affairs. So where it says in that part of the policy, the board's director of internal audit shall attend the meetings of the standing committee, that really now should be taken out if that person's gonna be sitting in the audit committee, or do you want that person to be in both those committees?
No, that's correct. That's been the assumption. We actually had some, we actually had some more, when we established this, some of those guiding, changes. And again, that goes back to why the chair and vice chair of that committee were invited to sit on the audit committee, is because of that, to help with that transition. To separate out that work.
Okay, the other thing is, it says the Operations Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee is responsible for reviewing issues pertaining to management and audit functions. So really, audit functions need to come out also, because that would be the other committee. Okay. Okay, I can make those changes.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can move forward to the question, which is to submit policy 8100 to the superintendent designee for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? And are there any objections to submitting policy 8100 to the superintendent designee for approval? Hearing none, the motion passes. Policy 8100, Board of Education Standing Committees and Focus Work Groups will be submitted to the superintendent designee for approval. We're going to move on to item 5.0, action items. There are 2 items for consideration. So the first is item 5.1, policy 5121, grading and reporting for elementary and secondary students. I recognize Mrs. Welsh to provide an overview of policy 5121, grading and reporting for elementary and secondary students.
Okay, policy 5121 has been revised, and it talks about promoting fairness, encouraging continuous learning, but better reflect student achievement and address the commitment of the Prince George's County Board of Education to all students learning and achieving at high levels, and that also grading, reporting, and the process for grade changes are applied consistently in and across the Prince George's County Public Schools, all the schools in the system. And the key components of the policy following grading and reporting practices is that making sure there's reduced performance variability, the promotion of accountability, providing students the opportunity to earn grades that reflect their ability to demonstrate learning outcomes, providing students with equitable access to academic resources and opportunities and educational rigor, providing students and parents with an overview of the course expectations along with grading procedures, providing students and parents with information about weights of honors, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and dual enrollment courses, informing parents and students about how attendance factors into students' grades, and providing ongoing progress reports to parents and students. Additionally, this policy does require that the superintendent to develop a process for changing students' grades, which is in alignment with COMAR, which lays out very specifically what has to happen for grading and reporting, and there's a whole section that talks about grade changes. So that's basically the policy in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. The question is to submit policy 5121 to the full board for public comment and consideration. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Are there any objections to submitting policy 5121 to the full board for public comment consideration? Hearing none, the motion passes. Policy 5121, grading and reporting for elementary and secondary students, will be submitted to the full board for public comment and consideration. And colleagues, I know we've got a few people who had travel kind of constraints, and they joined today to get us to quorum. I'm hoping that we can maybe move through these a little bit faster if possible. I know we didn't consolidate this time, but if we can kind of get through these next few, I think we only have one more, and then we'll be coming to kind of a conclusion of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Welsh, but I just wanted to name that we have one more policy.
I'll
It's
talk
item-
quick. I said I'll talk fast.
Okay, great. So it's item 5.2, policy 5131, school clubs and organizations. It's a rescission. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Welsh to provide an overview of 5131, school clubs and organizations.
So the reason that I'm requesting that this policy be rescinded is because you actually have two policies. One is policy 5134, which, well, first of all, policy 5122, which is interscholastic and extracurricular activities, and it goes into a whole thing about the value of extracurricular activities, which is what the school clubs and organization also talks about. So we have redundancy there. And then the other board policy is 3150, solicitation and acceptance of funds and other resources, which does address fundraising. And so the and 5134 also addresses fundraising and accepting, funds from outside sources. So there's a redundancy there. So instead of, since we already have two policies that are already addressing the issues that are sitting in board policy 5134, it would make sense to just rescind that policy so you don't have an extra policy that's, really redundant. It also increases your chances of confusion when you have the same topic on different policies. And so that's why that's the recommendation to have it rescinded.
Great. Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. The question is to submit policy 5131 to the full board for public comment and consideration. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Are there any objections to submitting policy 5131 to the full board for public comment consideration? Hearing none, the motion passes. Policy 5131, school clubs and organizations rescission, will be submitted to the full board for public comment and consideration. We're now going to move on to item 6.0, new business and governance. For first reader, there are 9 items for consideration, which will be considered as a consent agenda. These policies will be distributed to the general public for comments. No comments are received. So this is item 6.1, policy 0116, wellness, nutrition, and physical activity. Policy 6.2, policy 2801, safe and supportive schools. Policy 3517, security of buildings and grounds rescission. Policy 5125, student records rescission. Policy 5126, student information, a rescission. Policy 5132, portable electronic devices in schools, rescission. Policy 8261, rights and privileges granted by board and student members, rescission. Bylaw 9210, chair. And bylaw 9271, student member of the board. The question is to submit the policies related to items 6.1 through 6.9 to the full board for consideration as first reader. Is there a second?
Second. You said there was a rescission about the student board policy. Can you just
So yeah, so this was the rights and privileges granted by student board members. And so again, that was for like the voting and what could they vote on pieces there. Mrs. Welsh, do you want to add any additional context?
So the one that we're rescinding is does address like the rights of the student board member, but it doesn't go into any real detail about it, as it's not up to date as the one that we ended up it's actually a bylaw right now, but it will be a policy that goes into great detail about, not only it talks about what the student board member can vote on and what they can't vote on. It includes the whole thing when they're running for the student board member, the funding that goes to support that, and another person that might be running against them. It also talks about when they go on, let's say, on conferences and stuff, and making sure that the board covers the cost of their chaperone attending with the student board member, as well as the like even every, during the week when they're going to board meetings or to some other board functions, and they themselves drive themselves and they get funded, a refund for the cost of gas and whatever, like anyone else does, or else the person who's doing that, transporting them to these different events, they submit the paperwork like everyone else does, and they would get funding. And then the last piece, it has about the scholarship for the student board members. So it's much more comprehensive than the one that was sitting in 8,000. So so that's why we're recommending that be rescinded.
And I just want to add, I think you already know this, Chair Walker, but HB 1079, which was the law that kind of addressed some of this, it's an amalgamation of like both that as well as other things, making us comparable to what other districts are doing, as far as how they compensate student board members when they run for elections, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are some like legal changes that we made because of the law, and then I think it existed because of that. It was the purpose of all of those things, as Mrs. Welsh aptly said. Board Member Boozer Strother.
Thank you. A couple things. One, the fact that we're moving on these when they still have the title bylaw, are we, because of our earlier action, do they now get called policy?
So I
'Cause they're-
think until we have that resolution go into effect, so any changes we make right now to the bylaw or policy goes to the bylaw or policy. Once we change the naming or the distinction between a bylaw or policy, it still exists. The language is still included in there. And for the purpose of this, it's just redundancy. So it's really just everything is in the bylaw right now for the student board member 9271 that is either added from policy 8261, the rights and privileges granted to student members. So we're either adding to or having a redundancy from that policy. So anything we change with the bylaw piece would just be changing it from a bylaw to a policy. Nothing is going to change the effect of what's in
Yeah.
the
Okay, I just wanted to note that, and then I would like to request a review of the changes to 9210 to make sure we're clear on that, since we did just go through a process of that. It would be good to know what these changes are. Thanks.
I see. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. We have discussion. Are there any objections? Again, this is to item 6.9.
No, I'm asking for a review of the changes to 9210. If Ms. Welsh could review
Oh, I
those.
see. Okay, I'm sorry.
So we're all clear on what they are.
Got it.
So, Cindy, is there any chance you have that the most recent version that you could pull it up so we can look at it? And I do want to point out about these bylaw, the two that we're looking at, the bylaw. And I wrote those though, just using the very same format that we use for policy. So it's just once that's been decided to move it over to policy, it'll be very easy to do. Okay, the purpose of this is to set forth procedures for election of chair and a vice chair, and then the steps to be taken in the event of vacancy in either office. And then if you proceed down further, two areas that was a conversation piece that we added definitions for was temporarily, a period of time that is 1 month or greater following a 2-week notice from the chair. And then vacancy, an occupied chair or vice chair position, which will remain unoccupied until the annual meeting in December. So then if you proceed further, we did the term of the chair and vice chair, and that's in 1079 shall be 2 years instead of 1. So that's in the law. And then all of the information about the duties of the chair also come from was House Bill 1079 that laid out all the duties of the chair. And then if you scroll down further, let's see. Okay. In the absence of the chair at a board meeting, the vice chair shall perform the duties ordinarily assigned. Then if both the chair and the vice chair are temporarily unavailable to carry out the above responsibility, the remaining members of the board shall select other members to serve in the capacity of the chair and the vice chair until the return of the chair or vice chair. Then in the event of vacancy in the office of the chair, the vice chair will assume the responsibilities of the chair until the annual meeting in December at which the election of where the chair will be held. If the vice chair declines to assume the responsibilities of the chair, then the board will elect a replacement for the chair. Then in the event of a vacancy in the office of the vice chair, the remaining board members shall elect a replacement at the next regularly scheduled meeting of the board. And then scroll down further. We took that out. Then it says it is the responsibility of the chair, the vice chair, and other board members to carry out the responsibilities in compliance with the law. So that's basically it in a nutshell. So I know the interest you're probably interested in is the whole section about what happens when one is either vacant, either they're absent temporarily, or they actually, it's considered that there is an actual vacancy to that particular office. And that's why we did put terms in the definitions.
Thank you for reviewing that. So the term, I'm going to say because there's a definition of temporarily and a definition of vacancy. What is the definition of absent? It's C, in the absence of the chair at a board meeting. Okay, just within meeting is absent. Okay, just singularly.
When we went through that as a committee to discuss it, I think the issue came down to, well, when we're saying they're temporarily absent, how long does that expand? What's the period? What does temporarily mean? So that's why I got defined as that.
So essentially it cancels out anything less than temporary is an absence. If it's temporarily, then it is acknowledging a period of time, but otherwise anything short of that would be an absence. So that could be 2 days. I don't think yeah.
So a period of time that is 1 month or greater following a 2-week notice from the chair. So what if the chair never gives notice? What if what if someone is just not showing up and not saying anything?
That's a good point.
That is a good point.
I think you could probably put in or, right? Or so in the if they don't provide notice, then I guess it's just the opposite of like, regardless, within 30 days, notice or no notice, they are temporarily vacating the role of chair, and then we're replacing them. I don't know. I mean, that's what my thinking, but Chair Walker.
Yeah, I was gonna say, literally, we have been talking this topic for months. When I say months, I mean absolute months. And I think that if it would have been able to move forward, we would have saved ourselves a little bit of heartache. However, it's really important that we define these. So thank you, Board Member Booz Estrada. I think in the absence of the chair, the vice chair steps in, right? And so if that continues to happen, you're either going to go against the attendance policy, or you're going to move up upon the time limits that were given inside of this here. I think the piece that I wanted to make sure we had, which has been in here, thank you, Ms. Welsh, for putting it in the entire committee, was the piece that in the event that there is a vacancy inside of the chair position, then the vice chair will assume that role until the December elections, because we already have December elections, right? And I think that just helps with a lack of disruption. So I'm happy to see that. And I hope I answered your question. In my mind, Board Member Booz Estrada, it is in the absence of, that means you're not coming. And if it becomes a steady thing, you're in violation of our attendance policy, or you hit the time limit that we just noted here. But I think we'll be able to review it again when we see it. It's been a while. So when we see it one more time, if we push this one through. But thank you. Good question.
Well, and as you review other parameters that are in that we have, that makes sense, that it becomes a singular absence over and over again until other absence triggers happen, which is if you reach 25% absences or four consecutive, that the board presumably would vote for the chair to send a letter to
3
the
consecutive
state board. Yeah, 3 consecutive. So that definitely helps me. That helps me understand that it doesn't exist in and of only in itself. Okay, thank you.
Well, and I think I think you bring up good points that Robin, maybe we want to just consider making some adjustments here. Because I don't know if the policy explicitly addressed what she just said, which is if it is like that 25% piece, I know, yeah, you would want to make sure that the chair is like not missing 50% of meetings, even if they're like, well, again, I think that would trigger the temporary vacancy. But
25% is the rule.
I personally think comprehensive policies that solve for things that we can't think of right now, like there's always going to be a situation like I couldn't have thought of that, but it happened. So I think if we can have the language as solid and as tight as possible, then that ensures that we don't have like any, unintended consequences. And I think what Pam is saying actually is getting at a gap that this policy isn't addressing.
So, Chair Briggs, I'm thinking maybe we pull it, not have to go to first reader. I go make some language changes and we bring it back to the board, to the committee to talk about one more time.
And I know that's an unpopular opinion because we've been talking about this for forever and a day, but but I also feel like forever and a day means we should have perfect, as close to perfect as possible. And if someone can ask a question and we like, oh, we didn't think about that, that's probably telling us we need to do some more thinking still. But Chair Walker.
Yes, I'm not the chair of this committee. I'm a lowly participant, so I will vote accordingly and we will move it through and get it as perfect as possible. I do think because we do have multiple policies that it could, to your point, Ms. Welsh, if we could reference the attendance policy in there, I do appreciate the fact that we want to be as comprehensive as possible. I'm just nervous that as we put specific language in here, what if we then change the attendance policy? And then what's going to trigger us to remember to come back to this one? So as you think about all of those things, I think that's what Mr. Swift was getting at as well, in the multiple locations for super details, because we might get ourselves into something where two policies might conflict and we just don't have a trigger or memory to remind us that inside of the chair policy that there's an attendance policy. Like, it's just not natural. At least for me, my brain doesn't go all the places. But if we say reference the attendance policy, then they'll go there for consideration. That's all.
And I was just going to say, we have done that already. We have either referenced other policies or other like APs and stuff to give, just to make it easy. So we can absolutely do that in that policy.
And I think, Mrs. Welsh, from what I've seen, like I'm sure she agrees, like you want to make policies as evergreen as possible, because if you can be as broad, then you don't have to worry about all of those contingencies. So I think, again, to your point, we should still be thinking about that, right? We should be thinking about, if we change this small little thing, we shouldn't be updating this policy every 10 seconds. And this should be capturing, this or that. So I think you all are kind of making the point of what Mrs. Welsh just said, which is that we should just think some more thinking on this, and then we'll come back. So that would mean that we're pulling 6.8, and we're just doing 6.1 through 6.7, and then 6.9. And that's what we're voting on right now, is 6.1 through 6.7 and 6.9. So I restated, the question is to submit the policies related to agenda items 6.1 through 6.7 and 6.9 to the full board for consideration as first reader. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. The policies under agenda items 6.1 through 6.7 and 6.9 will be submitted to the full board for first consideration. We're going to move on to item 7.0, follow-ups. Follow-ups from the meetings will be addressed at the next Planned Policy and Governance Committee meeting. And next steps, the next virtual Policy and Governance Committee meeting will be on September 17th, 2024. Please continue to check the Prince George's County Board of Education webpage for meeting information and updates. Before we close, I want to turn it over to Miss Atlian for anything.
Quick question, because my director would be mad at me if I let this slide. So I think we need to, because he gave me a 5-page document with motions that I read yesterday. So can we have a motion to refer bylaw 9210 back to the administration?
Okay. So I move to refer bylaw 9210 back to the administration. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Bylaw 9210 chair will be referred back to the administration for further consideration. Chair Walker.
I'm sorry, with that, Oh, because Robin is part of the administration. Okay, that's why we're doing it. Okay, got you. Thank you. The other thing I just wanted to ask is a clarifying question. So, Ms. Welsh, the policy that we talked about for grading, I recall as I voted is that it was for the superintendent about changing grades. However, I recognize that there is a task force that's assigned to just grading at the grading level. And for instance, if you could pass with 3 C's and an E, for instance, something like that. Does any of that filter into this policy? Maybe it's for Mr. Briggs and Ms. Welsh, but I think it's for Ms. Welsh. And if not, it's okay, but maybe I can just take it offline just to understand if there's any connection between the two. Do you know what I'm speaking of at all?
No.
Okay.
So I'm
think
like
so-
going, there is a task force? I didn't know that. No one shared that with me.
Oh,
No,
Uh,
we had a presentation, Robin, and there is a task force that like determines like scaling for grades. Well, I think
Oh.
it's separate, right? Like if you think of like what is a weighted A, what is a like all that kind of stuff. But I guess I might have missed the question, Chair Walker, and then I know we have Ms. Adlian.
no problem. What I'm asking is there a linkage between the two? Is there a linkage between the work that the task force is doing to weigh grades? I love it how you said that. It's no problem with that. With the superintendent making modifications for the grades. If in fact the two link, then I'd like to understand that better. But if in fact they remain separate and that is just the administration, then that's fine too. And I'll follow up on that end. I think what you just said is that they remain separate, Mr. Briggs, is that the scaling, great word, the scaling of grades will stay with the administration, but the policy we're specifically looking at, it doesn't intertwine. Instead, this one here is really all about the superintendent changing grades for scholars.
Well, I mean, I think theoretically, I think Robin would agree, but it's like the board policy should AP should derive from a board policy. So whatever they're doing we should have broadly like stated some things. And I think this policy might be the one that addresses that. I'm not sure. So Robin, you might know that answer.
There is 3 APs that have to do with grading for each of the groups for kindergarten, middle school, and high school. And in fact, we just reviewed those APs and they should be published shortly. And then there's another AP that is has to do with grade changes. So which is then there's a whole process for when there's a thought of changing a grade, either because the parent might request it or the teacher realized there was a mistake or whatever it might be. So all of that is done. I mean, so the policy is to reflect what Komar's sharing with us, that not only do we have to how we can put grading together and what we are considering in our AP for the grading, as well as in reporting the grades to parents to make sure they have all the information. Then that Komar also talks about the fact about that you can change grades, but there's a process that must be in place for changing grades. And so that's in the process. That particular AP is in the process for being reviewed shortly. Our internal audit right now is doing reviews of grade changing practices in the schools. So I was waiting to see what their results were, only because if something shows up to be a persistent problem and in the audits, that maybe that's something we need to reflect in the administrative procedure just to make sure we're addressing the concerns. I'm thinking the task force you're talking about must be administrative task force that maybe they use when they're addressing their administrative procedure for any possible changes, is what I'm guessing. Other than, and I would not necessarily be aware of that. I get them the administrative procedures after they have made all the changes to them, not during the process. So I don't know.
That's fair. No, thank you so much. I'm clear. Thank you.
You're good. Okay. So we're gonna move on to item 8, closing remarks from the chair and adjournment. And we're gonna go to closing remarks. We have come to the end of our first meeting. Feels like it was well overdue, but also very fast. So thank you all for that. Thank you for showing up if you had other things and made the sacrifice. I think this is setting the tone for this year that we'll do that. And thank you all for the great discussion. The time is now 7:05 p.m. The August 20th, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting is adjourned. And see you all soon.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Good night.